Welcome to another Telltale Books video. I'm Greg, and I am starting my series that I promised just recently about everything I can get my hands on by Poul Anderson or Paul Anderson. Kicking off this, then, a tiny bit about Paul Anderson. He was born in Bristol, Pennsylvania in 1926, November 25th, 1926, and I'm airing this video for the first time on his birthday. So happy birthday, anniversary, Paul Anderson. And he died on July 31st of 2001. Way too early. He is not quite a golden age author. He started writing in 1947, and he did start in Astounding Stories. As a matter of fact, his first short story was in this issue of Astounding Stories. And the story, which I'll be talking about when I get to it in this video, is called Tomorrow's Children. Love the cover of this one. I believe it's Hubert Rogers, my favorite artist of the 1940s. Really good illustrator. Anyway, that's the original astounding science fiction that Paul Anderson's first story appeared in. And he wrote quite a bit for Astounding starting out. He wrote for, and this is John W. Campbell's Astounding. He was writing for Campbell for like 3 years before he started also selling stories over to Planet Stories and other magazines like that, writing stuff that was more adventure oriented and not quite appropriate for Astounding. But he did continue to publish in Astounding all the way up through his career. I mean, when I first started when I first started reading science fiction, a few years after I started reading science fiction in the 1980s, Anderson published the Saturn game in Analog, edited at that time by Stanley Schmidt. And he won a Hugo Award for that story. So, great. He was still publishing great science fiction and still putting it in Astounding and Analog throughout his career. But he did write for the lurid adventure science fiction pulps like Planet Stories. And as a matter of fact, we've already reviewed one of his stories. It was in 1951, the January 1951 Planet Stories, and called Which of the Demon Seas. It's a pretty good story, but pure adventure, pure science fiction adventure, a lot of fantasy elements thrown into it. And that's another thing. It boggles my mind why, with the huge interest in fantasy that people in booktube have right now, they're mostly reading fantasy, and they seem to be drifting into some of the older stuff. None of them has bothered with Poul Anderson yet, and Poul Anderson wrote a lot of great fantasy novels. Some of them are fantasy science fiction, but some are pure fantasy, like Three Hearts and Three Lions, The Broken Sword. What are some of the others? Rogue Sword, The High Crusade. That's a classic. It's science fiction fantasy. It's a spaceship that crash lands in medieval England. It's great. What are some of the others? The only thing I ever hear anybody talking about on the other channels on BookTube is Tau Zero, which is a great science fiction novel, deservedly a classic. But there's no, with the interest in fantasy, he wrote a lot of fantasy, and he had Norwegian roots, I believe, Viking roots anyway, and so he wrote books like Rolf Krake's saga, which relates to the Norse time, A Midsummer Tempest, Merman's Children. He wrote a Conan novel. Just, huge number of, and he wrote a huge number of stories in general. I got 385. I think my list is complete, but there may be something missing. But I've got 385. That's a lot of stories, a lot of writing. And so his very first story, Tomorrow's Children, was in the March 1947 Astounding Stories, published by John W. Campbell Jr. And I've got it in a lot of different places. This is a very well anthologized story. I don't have all of them out here by me, but I do have The Great Science Fiction Stories, Volume 9, which covers 1947, edited by Isaac Asimov and Martin H. Greenberg. I have that in paperback, and that has Tomorrow's Children in. The Book of Poul Anderson is a paperback collection by Daw Books, which has Tomorrow's Children in. Of course, the issue of Astounding that I just showed you. A Treasury of Science Fiction, which I have here. I just got a hold of this because it's got a number of stories that I need for all these different video series I'm doing. This is Groff Conklin's second science fiction anthology. Conklin was one of the earliest science fiction anthologists, and this was only the second one he did in 1948. This is the first edition I got here. And Tomorrow's Children is in this book. It's also in this collection, which this is the first edition paperback. It has been reprinted many times over the years, but this is First Flight, edited by Damon Knight, which collects together the first stories of a number of different authors, including Tomorrow's Children by Poul Anderson. And it also has another one I'm going to do very soon. I've already read it, called The Isolinguals by L. Sprague de Camp. And among others, it has Black Destroyer by Van Vogt, which I've already done a video on. Lifeline by Robert A. Heinlein, I've already done a video on that. Ether Breather by Theodore Sturgeon, I've already done that one. That Only a Mother by Judith Merrill, I've already done that. Tea by Brian Aldiss, I've already done that. And Loophole by Arthur C. Clarke is coming up really fast. Loophole was his first professional story. I've already done a number of fan stories that Arthur Clarke has done, so Loophole is coming up on us really fast. And those are all in this little paperback, First Flight. Damon Knight is another. He was a great science fiction author, but he was a really great editor too, and he did a lot of different excellent anthologies down through the years. And the easiest way to get a hold of Tomorrow's Children, if you really want, is to buy this Nesfa Press book. It's volume 1 in the collected short works of Poul Anderson, called Call Me Joel. And this has Tomorrow's Children in it. And this is an excellent book with beautiful artwork by Bob Eggleton on the cover. And you can buy this new from the Nesfa Press website. I've talked about Nesfa Press a lot. I'm very impressed with their lineup of books. I wish they would keep doing them. I don't know why they stopped, but their books are wonderful. They're beautiful books. They're collecting together great science fiction. And Tomorrow's Children was the first of a series of 3 stories, which together make up this book, Twilight World. The cover calls it a novel, but it is the 3 short stories, and they are reprinted. The title of Tomorrow's Children is changed to Prologue, but it's still Tomorrow's Children. It's the same story. And then the other 2 stories have their correct name, but together they connect together to make what what this publisher called a novel. This is a first, it's first, not a first edition, it's the book club edition of the first version of Twilight World. So I've got that, and I'm looking forward to reading the entire series. And the second story in the series is actually Anderson's second published story. So that will be my next story in my Poul Anderson series. So to get to the point with Tomorrow's Children, as I said, it's his first short story. It's actually a novelette. And the synopsis: after an atomic war, a guy named Drummond has been touring around Europe, basically taking stock of exactly how far back, exactly the living conditions of people, how far back civilization was pushed by the war, and how people are getting along after the war. And so he comes back to the United States after 2 years being gone from the United States, and sees that the United States is rebuilding pretty nicely. And so they send him out because of reports of radiation mutations. They send him out to tour the United States and take stock of where they're at and report back on what the situation is with these mutations. Are they something that can be is it a situation that can be corrected for people to be what we would call normal, or is it something that's spiraling out of control? There's a great quote from this story that I noted down on the website. Our problem is to learn to live with the mutants, to accept anyone as earthling, no matter how he looks, to quit thinking anything was ever settled by violence or connivance, to build a culture of individual sanity. Funny, mused Drummond, how the impractical virtues, tolerance and sympathy and generosity, have become the fundamental necessities of simple survival. I thought that was brilliant. So the story is about, after a nuclear war, radiation fallout. It's causing genetic mutations in people, which it's a theme that you're going to find again in only a year later in the first story by Judith Merrill that I mentioned, That Only a Mother, which I've already discussed, I think about 3 months ago. I did that video. So if you look at her backlist, you'll find That Only a Mother. And I should have a Judith Merrill playlist started, and that'll be on that. A very common theme about this time, of course, this is after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, after the atomic bombs were dropped. We were first learning about how people would be affected by atomic weaponry. And what we learned, how it can damage genes and cause mutations, led to a lot of really bad Hollywood movies of giant ants and giant tarantulas and giant everything, even the colossal man and a colossal woman, things that were just absolutely impossible. The more likely science is that the mutations would be non-viable and cause cancers to develop, which would just kill the person early. And so that's basically the scientific basis for this story. It's a science fictional exploration of, kind of thinking about what might happen with that after an all-out war. We saw what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now, what would happen if there was an all-out war between the U.S. and Soviet Union, and the whole world was involved, and atomic bombs were being dropped everywhere? How would that affect the people? That's what the story is about. It's an interesting story, and it helped launch a great career in the genre. But I would not call this a great story. I would not call it a top tale. It's a little bit weakly written. It's an intelligent story, and Anderson did think about his subject, but he just didn't flesh out the story enough with enough detail. There could have been more detail. It could have packed a better wallop if it would have gone further in, first of all, building the world after the bomb, and showing us more of what is happening. He shows us a little bit about the mutations, but show us more of what's going on out there. Be more dramatic about the different mutations and how people are coping with it, and the changes in society that develop. Now, of course, this is just a novelette, and it's the first of 3. Maybe he'll go there. If I finish off Twilight World, maybe he'll go there in the other stories. But for the person sitting down reading Poul Anderson's first story in a brand new issue of Astounding Science Fiction, the story comes across as kind of weak, almost like a draft story. Like there needed to be more to it, needed to be fleshed out more. And I think that holds it back from being a great story. It definitely pulls it back and definitely keeps it from getting top tail status. But it's worth a read. It's an interesting story. Definitely anybody that likes Golden Age science fiction, likes older science fiction, if you're interested in after the bomb type stories, especially from the 1950s, it's way better than giant ants or giant tarantulas, and more realistic about that too. And so that's the people who should read it. The people who want to really dig deep into Poul Anderson, and the people who really love the older science fiction. You'll enjoy this story. Probably won't become your favorite, but I think you'll at least enjoy it. So hit the like button for the video. Hit the subscribe button if you want to know of the future Poul Anderson videos that come up, and all the other videos, all the other different authors I'm following. Subscribe to us and come on back. There will be more. I'll be here talking about them just as quickly as I can read them and shoot them.